Good evening, I am Zunaira Azhar and you're watching DECODE, where we define and analyze the stories shaping our world. Tonight we begin with the contradiction, a war that is unresolved, a supply crisis that is ongoing, and a moment being presented as a victory. Because while the region remains at edge, Donald Trump is preparing to address his nation after delaying potential strikes on Iran and celebrating the rescue of an American airman. So what are we actually looking at? A turning point or a performance? Tonight we decode three things: the performance of power and who is writing that script, the cost behind the scenes and who is paying that cost, and the exit that still refuses to move and why. Let's begin. On Easter Sunday morning, the President of the United States posted this on Truth Social. Tuesday will be Power Plant Day and Bridge Day, all wrapped up in one, in Iran. Open the strait or you'll be living in hell. Just watch. This was not a classified military briefing. This was not a formal address to a nation. This was presidential ultimatum posted on social media with profanity, a deadline and a sign-off of praise be Allah. It was not the first threat of this kind. Trump had already warned that US hasn't even started destroying what's left in Iran. Bridges next, then electric power plants. In a separate post he wrote, with a little more time, we can easily open the Strait of Hormuz, take the oil and make a fortune. In interviews, he told Axios there was a good chance of a deal, but added that if they don't make a deal, I'm blowing up everything over there. He made similar comments to ABC News saying, if Iran does not come to a deal, we are going to blow up the whole country. This escalation came one day after US Navy SEAL Team 6 extracted a downed Air Force colonel from deep inside Iranian territory. A rescue Trump called an amazing show of bravery and talent. Iran downplayed the mission, calling it a deception. Trump has threatened to strike Iran's power infrastructure on 2 previous occasions and delayed both times, citing ongoing diplomatic contacts. Legal experts warned that attacks on power plants could constitute a war crime under international law. 100 legal scholars signed a letter stating that such strikes would target objects indispensable to the survival of civilians. The deadlines are passing, the strikes are not happening again, and the president is now preparing to address the nation. To say what? That is yet to be seen. Let's be precise about the moment we are in, because precision matters here. The war is not over. The Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure. The energy shock is not contained, and no formal de-escalation agreement exists between Washington and Tehran. And yet, something has shifted, not on the ground, in the frame. A delay, a primetime speech, a rescue, elevated into a symbol. Now, I want to be fair here. The rescue of an American airman is a real event. The delay of a strike is a real decision. These are not fabrications, but context is everything. When a military decision becomes a press conference, when a pause becomes a pivot, when a hostage return is packaged as foreign policy win before any underlying issue is resolved, we have to ask, what is actually being communicated and to whom? This administration has a pattern, and the pattern is performance before policy. Announce loudly, reframe aggressively, manage the moment, and let the details follow or not follow at all. The Strait of Hormuz is not open. Global oil markets are still disrupted. Iran has not agreed to anything. So what exactly is being celebrated? The answer, I think, is this: the appearance of control. In a crisis, the leader who looks decisive, even without resolution, often gains domestically what they cannot yet secure diplomatically. And Trump understands that calculus better than almost anyone in modern politics. But here is the problem with performing resolution before achieving it. The gap between the performance and the reality eventually closes, and not always in your favor. And to turn this into a debate, I have a guest with me, very appropriate one, Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, former diplomat. Thank you so much, Ambassador Jamil, for joining me. According to the latest sources, there is an Islamabad Accord at play, apparently, with Field Marshal Asim Munir serving as the central figure alongside the Iranian foreign minister. and J.D. Vance from the U.S. side. What concrete guarantees is Washington actually putting on the table this time to convince Tehran that this isn't just another temporary pause before another escalation?
It's a very tough task which Pakistan had taken upon its shoulder. One that it had so much of complexity and complication because of the Israel. And so long as Israel is intervening in the politics of the United States, in the Foreign Service of the United States, in the Pentagon, and the State Department, and all other departments, the Israeli lobby in particular, they are so effective, they are so impactful that, the Americans are saying, including John Mearsheimer, who is a political scientist and a professor in Chicago University, says that Israeli lobby and Israel, they prevail upon the foreign policy and the national interest of the United States. And not only John Mearsheimer, it's Jeffrey Sachs also, it's MacArthur also. There's so many other American political scientists, experts, they are saying the same things. And now, coming straight on what we are doing now under these complex situations, as I said, it's a tough job. But then we've been having a very good experience of that. In 71, again, it was equally tough once we brought the United States and China together. They were not seeing eye to eye before that. It was Pakistan's 1 year back-channel diplomacy that Pakistan was able to convince the United States and China. And both of them, they agreed to have a meeting, and that too, a secret meeting, in which a secret flight had taken off from Pakistan and went to China, and then afterward, the entire world story changed, and today they are friends. So this one, there was a huge subtle diplomacy ever since the first strike on Iran. So Pakistan was fully involved in it, and we have witnessed that the Prime Minister, the Field Marshal, Sayyid Asif Munir, and all other who matter, they've been really playing their role in it, and they, more importantly, were keeping in they're not only keeping in contact with them, in full consultation and with full confidence of China, with full confidence of Turkey, Egypt, the Gulf countries, and also Russia. So it's a complete, group of the countries who normally form the South Bloc, because we know that the world is moving from the global North to global South, and the important stakeholders of the global South, they got together and they thought that it's in the interest of the United States, interest of the region, and interest of these countries that this heat should now really have some be addressed now. And therefore, you see that we have the indication. I did some programs early morning around 8:30, and I did connect the dot. And then I'd given my expert opinion that by this evening, we'll have a very clear indication from Donald Trump's side while he is going to address a press conference, Pakistan local time, around 10 p.m. onward. I think we can be tuned up with the television, and we'll find that there will be some indicators of agreeing to some of the points of Iran, and Iran agreeing to those 15 points, some of the points of those 15 points. Obviously, those 15 points were non-starter, and that's why Pakistan and these group of countries, they were making efforts that at least there should be some convergence on some points so that they are able to at least start a regular face-to-face meeting, and which could lead in next 3 weeks time, that could lead to a permanent agreement.
Well, I'll come to Donald Trump's tweets and his speeches later with you, because that is very much my agenda here to talk to you about. But talking about the latest development first, apparently the framework Pakistan has put to both sides has two phases. An immediate ceasefire and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, followed by a 15 to 45-day window of negotiating a broader lasting settlement. Under the deal, Iran would commit to abandon its pursuit of nuclear weapons in exchange for sanctions relief and the release of frozen assets. I don't understand. This had already happened in JCPOA. So do you see a sticking point from either side, especially Iran, that might be the reason why there is still an ongoing process?
Indeed, an ongoing process. Iran, even last time, what Iran had agreed in 2015 during Obama government with the JCPOA, which means the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, P5+1, and the P5 were the P5 countries plus Germany. They were the one. They really were very much interested. And again, it had taken them about 2 years to reach to this. So coming back on this point, the Iran is still sticking to that point, that 3.67 enrichment, which should not really have any concern for any of the countries. But Israel have been pushing that there should be zero enrichment and there should be all the equipment should be dismantled, not even the power plant, nuclear power plant, which obviously Iran finds that it's their sovereign right and it's under the international legal framework that they are doing. So that's one part. So Donald Trump has already made speeches in which he has given an indication that he has achieved all the goals which he had, just few more goals, and the operation is going to be called off. That's what yesterday he has made the statement. And then he has also said that they have been able to disseminate all their military equipment and they've been able to disseminate their capability of fighting about 95%, right? And he has claimed that he has been able to really destroy all the infrastructures. And he has already claimed in June that the nuclear sites and facilities have been buried and finished for all, once for all. And again, there was some bombardment. So he has a very good ground, the Donald Trump, that he can have a peace achieving, he can announce the victory, and Iran has a very good grounds to announce that yes, they were holding
But he
on
did
to the
exactly
ground.
the same last time, didn't he? And yet we are witnessing what we are witnessing right now. So what's the guarantee that this time around the same conflict is not going to come back in few months?
The difference between last time and this time, there are three. One, that last time, these many countries were not really playing their role, including Pakistan. One. And second, that last time the ground reality were different. The United States and Israel had not suffered damage. Israel only preceding night, there were about 2,000 suicide drones which were launched by Iran in a span of 6 hours' time, never seen before. And Israelis, they were on the roads, even a couple of days before also. They were on the roads and they were pressing their government to stop this nonsense, stop this war, right? So that's one pressure. The second is Israel has realized that despite all the Iron Dome, despite all those thoughts, was it 2,000 suicide bombers not costing more than $20,000 against the thoughts and interceptors, which are 30 to 40 $1 million per unit, per missile. So imagine the kind of expenses. And then the last volley which was fired by Iran, they all reached their target. So now they have realized that, yes, Iran has still that capacity. And they retain that capacity to go on several more months. So therefore, they also understand that this time, at least Israel, even if they don't want it, they would like to have a pause to regroup themselves, re-strengthen themselves, and again direct their attacks or whatever they want to do in a greater Israel, fine enough. But at least there would be some time for the negotiators to negotiate, decide about the state of Hormuz according to the international law or whatever is agreed between Oman and Iran. Basically, there are two players in it. According to the international law, according to the United Nations laws of high sea, according to the United Nations laws of high sea, Article 17, in which innocent vessels have to be allowed to pass through these straits. Now, but there is a caveat in it. According to Article 9 of the same United Nations laws of high seas, the strait who have the sovereign territory within their territorial jurisdiction has the right to stop those vessels if they feel that there is any it's detrimental to their safety and security of that state which is controlled. So there are, and Pakistan is thriving on those not only international laws but also those contexts by making them realize the countries in the Middle East, the countries in the Gulf countries, that what is in the offing if it's not stopped. These countries who have made their countries in the last 30, 40, 50 years, they are just going to turn into ruins. So therefore, now there are
correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm reading from your analysis is that an off-ramp is not only needed by US, not only by Iran, but it is at the moment needed by Israel as well.
Very much so, because they never realized that much damage could be caused. If we only calculate the damages which has been caused, there are footage available for that. All their military units have been struck by Iran. In fact, why and how it's happening? Iran now has a very sophisticated navigating system, satellite system. China, Russia, they are helping Iran out in that, and very legally. Because I can explain you the satellites which are in the space and how they are really helping themselves. They are no longer using the GPS. They are using all satellite system, and that's why they are been able to strike wherever they want to. See Haifa, see Dimuna, see all those places.
And maybe that is a fraction of what we are able to see, because there is so much filter, there is so much of what we call media blockade over there, that the original footage is not coming out. Thank you so much, Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on our show. What we're seeing from Washington is mainly a management of perception. It is sophisticated, of course, but perception has a shelf life. What matters is what markets know, and they know that the strait isn't open still. The region knows no deal has been signed, and the countries sitting between these two powers absorbing the economic shockwave, they are not watching the press conference. They are watching their fuel prices, which brings us to one of those countries who are caught up in this war. A country that is simultaneously a mediator, a victim of this crisis, and a nation under its own actual fiscal pressure, Pakistan. We'll take a short break here before we decode that next. Keep watching Express 24/7. Pakistan is facing mounting economic pressure as a direct consequence of global energy disruption. Fuel and LPG prices have surged. External creditors, including the UAE and China, are engaged in discussions around repayment timelines and debt restructuring. And simultaneously, Islamabad remains actively involved in back-channel mediation between Washington and Tehran. According to Dawn, Pakistan has decided to return $3.5 billion in debt to the UAE before the end of this month. A senior Pakistani official said on Friday, describing the move as a cost the country was willing to bear to uphold national dignity, even as it is set to significantly draw down foreign exchange reserves. There is a particular kind of burden that does not make headlines, and Pakistan is carrying it right now. It is the burden of the middle, the country that is too strategically important to be ignored and too economically constrained to negotiate from the power and strength. Let's lay out what is actually happening. Pakistan imports a significant portion of its energy. When Gulf supply routes are disrupted, when the Strait of Hormuz is under pressure, Pakistan does not have the fiscal buffer to absorb the shock quietly. It shows up at the pump, it shows up at the LPG prices for the household that cooks with gas. It shows up in transport costs, which push up food prices, which push up inflation in an economy that is already in a fragile recovery. At the same time, Pakistan's external debt situation means it is in active conversations with both the UAE and China about restructuring. These are not adversarial conversations, but they are not conversations you would want to be having while you're also trying to project diplomatic weight on the world stage. And yet, Pakistan is doing exactly that. Islamabad is engaging Washington. It is engaging Tehran. It is coordinating with Beijing. It is attempting to position itself as a credible back channel, a country with relationships on multiple sides of this crisis that no single major power fully has. It is genuinely valuable, but how much of it is risky? That is the question the Pakistan's foreign policy establishment, I suspect, is debating on internally. Whether the long game value of being the country that helped resolve this crisis outweighs the short-term cost of leading with the influence you do not have yet, that's the major question. For this, we have with us Mehtab Haider, senior journalist, and the most appropriate person, I think, to answer these questions. Thank you so much, Mehtab, for joining us. Pakistan is mediating between Washington and Tehran, while simultaneously we are absorbing the economic consequences of their standoff as well. The rising fuel costs, debt pressure, shrinking fiscal space. At what point does active mediation stop being an asset for any country and start becoming a liability? Because look at what's happening to our own economy.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much for having me. Actually, we have been able to stabilize the economy after striking the extended fund facility program, which was the consequent of after the standby arrangement program 1.5 years back. So, and at that point of time, the inflation was at its peak of 38%. But after signing of IMF program, the buffer was created by extending the overall foreign exchange, by building up the foreign exchange reserves, and inflation was brought down and overall stability was achieved. But when we were intended to move towards higher trajectory of growth, we have seen a major war in the Gulf region.
Right.
Now it has posed major challenges for Pakistan. For instance, we have seen that government of Pakistan had provided, first of all, they raised the fuel prices by rupees 55 per liter, and then they provided a subsidy of rupees 129 billion rupees. But we are under the IMF program. So the fiscal situation didn't allow us to provide further subsidy. We have signed the staff level agreement under the extended funds facility program in order to pave the way for release of fourth tranche. So the funds were exhausted, and then the government was left with no other choice but to raise the prices of both petrol and diesel, although the Prime Minister had to intervene and he had to brought down the petroleum levy by rupees 80 rupees per liter on petrol. But still, we have entered into the second wave of higher inflationary pressures, which will have certain consequences for the Pakistan's economy, because we have seen that the interest rate were brought down from 22% to 10.5%. Now it is on writing on the wall that tightening of monetary policy is on cards, because inflation might turn into a double digit in subsequent months of in next 2 months period. So our dream to achieve higher growth trajectory, I don't think so we will be able to move towards that dream, for materializing that dream. So that is the ultimate consequence of this war, and Pakistani people are paying heavy price because of this developing situation.
What, in your opinion, led to a situation where suddenly our creditors are asking for the money to be paid back at this stage?
Yes, that is another point. When we have created a buffer by increasing our foreign exchange reserves, and our foreign exchange reserves held by State Bank of Pakistan crossed $16 billion mark, and the commercial banks having foreign exchange of $5 billion. So in totality, Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves crossed $21 billion mark. This war has posed new challenges on the debt repayments as well, because within this month, we are supposed now that the UAE has asked Pakistan to pay back its $2 billion deposits, although its deposits are $3 billion, but another $1 billion is going to mature in July. So with 6% interest payment, we are supposed to pay back around $2.5 billion within this month to to our bilateral creditor, that is, in this case, is UAE. But there is another repayment which is becoming due within this week, and that is we are seeing and going to mature the Eurobond of $1 billion, on account of which Pakistan is supposed to pay back $1.3 billion to its investors who have invested into the Eurobond some few years back. So Pakistan is supposed to pay back around $3.7 to $3.8 billion within this month. So it is going to pose another challenge for Pakistan's struggling economy.
Is it motivated in the wake of the current crisis? Because if we look at the strategic position that UAE has taken in this war, maybe the position we have taken is, taken aback by then. But then what about China? Both of these countries are creditors. Both of these countries are friends. We are in mediation together. What has triggered this, in your opinion?
Actually, under the IMF program, when it was signed, all the creditors had given assurances to the lender of last resort that they are going to grant the rollover for 3 years period. So after 1.5 year period, they changed this commitment. So they have reversed from their commitment, but it is their money. So we shouldn't mind it, because they have asked Pakistan to pay them back. And first of all, this money got matured in December. They granted 1 month extension, then they granted 2 month extension, which was going to mature on 17th of April and then 23rd of April. So by the mid of this month, Pakistan is supposed to pay back $2 billion. Of course, it might have some geopolitical situation, but as they have borrowed us money at a very critical juncture, so Pakistan took a decision to give them back on the time of the maturity. Although at the initial stage, UAE had granted commitment for extending 3-year rollover for this whole period of the IMF program. But they preferred to get it back, and we shouldn't mind it.
Well, we shouldn't, but at the same time, our position, our economic position, and the kind of economic cost of this crisis that is landing on the countries like us, that is very disproportionate. So do you think Pakistan would be able to pay back this month?
Of course, Pakistan will be able to pay back. And there are some alternate options as well. For instance, under the IMF program, we have given commitment to the IMF that by end of June 2026, Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves held by the State Bank of Pakistan will be hovering around $17.5 billion. So after this premature retirement of debt, there will be two options. One is to convince the IMF to show some lenient attitude, keeping in view the war situation in the region, and because of abrupt demand of the lender to give them back their money. And the second option available is to Pakistan to generate the equivalent amount from other avenues. So both options are on the table.
Okay.
And let's see what kind of strategy is going to adopt by Pakistan's economic manager to cope with these arising challenges.
Right. Thank you so much, Mehtab Haider, for joining us. It was a pleasure having you. Pakistan is absorbing a crisis it did not create, mediating a conflict it cannot resolve alone, and doing both under significant domestic economic pressure. That is the cost behind the scenes. But cost only matters if it produces something. And right now, the one thing the region, the markets, and the international community are waiting for, an actual exit from this crisis, is not moving. Diplomacy is active, but active is not the same as effective. This is what we decode next in our final segment tonight. We ask the hardest question of all. Stay tuned. The war is now in its fifth week, and the diplomatic picture is at best murky. Washington says talks are ongoing. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says progress has been made, but declined to name a single country or intermediary. Tehran tells a different story. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed to Al Jazeera that messages have been exchanged, but was categorical in saying that the trust level is at zero. We don't see honesty, he said. On April 1st, a strike hit the home of Kamal Kharazi, a former Iranian foreign minister who was reportedly overseeing a potential back-channel meeting between Iranian officials and US Vice President J.D. Vance. Pakistan's mediation efforts have so far amounted for indirect exchanges with no formal framework in place. On the economic front, the cost of this stalemate is now measurable. Trump extended his pause on energy strikes by 10 days to April 6 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. That deadline is tonight. There is a phrase in diplomacy, talks about talks. It describes the stage before negotiation, where parties are simply trying to agree on the conditions under which they might eventually negotiate. That is broadly where we are right now. Now, why is the exit not moving? Three reasons, I think, and they are all structural. First, a political constraint in Washington. Domestic audiences reward hardness and punish concession, and any step towards resolution might look like a weakness. That is not a solvable problem through clever diplomacy, but a leadership problem. Second, the intermediaries, the way US looks at it, Pakistan, China, others, have interests of their own. They are not neutral. Their involvement shapes the process, and sometimes the shape of the process serves the intermediary more than it serves the resolution. Third, there is no deadline. Crises resolve faster when the cost of non-resolution is immediate and undeniable. Right now, the cost is being distributed across oil markets, across smaller economies like Pakistan, across households in importing nations. It is real, but it is diffuse. And diffuse pain is easier to tolerate politically than a concentrated one. Until one of those three things change, until domestic politics shift, until an intermediary gains a genuine mandate, or until the cost becomes concentrated enough to be undeniable, the exit will remain visible but unreachable. And let's have a guest on it to turn it into a debate. We have been joined by Brigadier Retired Waqar Hassan Khan, defense analyst. Thank you so much for joining us. We were just discussing that every party at this table, let it be Washington, Tehran, the Gulf states, China, Pakistan, they all have an interest in this process of diplomacy because the process itself provides cover and leverage to almost all the parties involved. So what would it actually take for any one of these actors to move from managing the crisis to genuinely resolving it? And who is that one mediator you think is the key to all this?
Shamasun, thank you very much for having me. I think it's very difficult at this time to really pinpoint that who could be the one. I'll just quote Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who's, I think, an international expert. And yesterday he was on different forums. And he was saying that whatever Trump is doing now is probably, and Netanyahu, is threatening the global peace. We are heading into a quagmire that probably international community will not be able to get out of. And somebody has to actually physically get involved and stop him. Like they were saying he's a narcissist, and they said that Netanyahu was a fascist. And for their, basically, I think Zionist lobbies, short-sighted objective, they put the entire region into flames. So he was suggesting it should be Russia, it should be China and maybe some other countries, that they could directly intervene, just tell Trump to stop. Now, here we are.
Is it that easy? Is it that easy?
Yeah, that's I think $1 billion question, because will they be able to intervene, or will they be able to diplomatically put pressure? But I think there are some signs that probably we are now entering the last 2 weeks. So this is my own assessment of the war, because if you look at the objectives of the war, it's not just shooting each other; it's basically to bend down the will of the other and then get your thing done. So if you look at public opinion, if you look at the I would say leadership's conduct, it's very clear. Just look at the tweet by President Donald Trump. I mean, is it let's say commander-in-chief of forces of the most mature democracy, or he's a thug, roaming around with these guns and shooting everywhere? Same is true for Netanyahu. But public pressure, I think, within US is now enormous. They have an election. It's now even Republicans are saying that basically there was a bad planning. There's a lot of infighting between Pentagon and political leadership, like Pete Hegseth is firing like 12 general officers of different ranks. So it doesn't, augur well for war, especially in the middle of the war. And look at Israel, which is the other stakeholder, that generally not much comes out.
Well, let's stay with US for a moment. Let's stay with US. Do you think J.D. Vance, at the moment, who is leading from US side along with Steve Witkoff, do you think Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump are on a different trajectory as compared to J.D. Vance, or they are all playing the same game? Is it just two different faces? One is just hitting the bull on the Truth Social and the other one is trying to have talks. Do you think this is connected, or do you think it is some tactics to gain more time for something bigger?
I think generally in wartime this would happen. You will have basically doves and hawks together, because ultimately you have to come to the negotiating table. So there's definitely room left for that. The only thing is what are the, let's say, terms and conditions. So if you look at, I think J.D. Vance, it appears that he's been sidelined. Generally, you don't find public statements coming. Maybe he's just visible. But on the other side, the war lobby, I would say the neocons cabal is pushing Trump. But I think finally they have realized that this has been a disaster. If you look at commentary from people like John Mearsheimer, I think he was there on with Falsen, I think day before yesterday. Then you have Scott Ritter, you have Conor McGregor, and even commentators from Europe, from France, from UK. They are saying that strategically you lost the war, and it's a time you get an off ramp and get out of it. And probably if you keep moving ahead, like this landing, and the confusion about recovery of pilot. Now there are questions being raised that they were two places far apart, and probably this was an attempt to, let's say, land some forces, and that happened very far away from where this F-15 was shot down. And this was a disaster. Like they lost C-130s, Black Hawks, and now they're saying 2 more helicopters. So what's the kind of operation that you are doing?
Right, but the cost is enormous. The whole world is paying the cost, including the economies like Pakistan. We talk about diplomacy as though it is linear. You negotiate, you agree, you implement, but this crisis has multiple overlapping flashpoints, I'd say. It has energy, it has military posture in it, it has sanctions involved, it has nuclear dimensions in it. Given this complexity, is a single exit even possible?
I don't think so, because look at as you mentioned, the complexity. So it's not only because if one more miscalculation, and you could end up, into disaster. Now, there's a neocon lobbies are pushing for nuclear button, not realizing that if you set the precedents in Iran, one, of course, is going to affect the entire region, Pakistan, Turkey, entire Gulf will be in flames. And then you are setting precedent for Mr. Putin and President Xi to do it, somewhere else. So where do we go from here? So I think that this is why it's so much complicated. But ultimately, when you look at the off-ramp being provided to both sides, probably it's going to be a regional plus superpowers, or let's say, powers like China and Russia intervening, and then motivating President Trump that, okay, you could declare your victory and just get out of it. The only thing is whether Iran is going to agree.
Isn't it going to be a sticking point for Iran that, you just announce your victory and get out? Don't you think there is some pride question on the Iranian side as well?
I think this is post-truth era. We have seen, what happened between Pakistan and India as an analogy. They are trying to claim it even today, the naval chief. So this will keep happening. And somehow, even there is a complete research in West that what is the notion of victory actually in war? Because both sides can claim, Russia-Ukraine war. So this will keep happening. One is to see what has happened on the ground. I feel there's a huge shock to American hegemony in the region. This is a great strategic loss. This is a huge shock to Israeli hegemony because now a middle power can claim that if you can stand your ground and you have some technology, you can take on a superpower. So this is, I think, a huge, I would say, challenge to US hegemony. And I would say that they have done it themselves by venturing into war without clearly defined objectives. It was based on misperception, like, they'll pick up Maduro and they could do it in Iran. I would say even Major O'Connor planning could have done better, I'm not undermining the ranks, but this is because of hubris and because of, misperception that they are now right into a quagmire. And the better thing would be to I feel that these 2 weeks, especially these 48 hours, are crucial because Trump is meeting his, I think, Pentagon team tonight, and then we may have some announcement. So let's see how things move. So it's very difficult to really define it in a program.
Yeah, but what is going to be the new normal? Because at the moment, if either of the side or both of the sides agree to the ceasefire, is the new normal going to be that Iran is letting the Strait of Hormuz going back to the same position as of before the war? Or is it going to maintain the control? Because leaving the control of it would mean stepping back, and stepping back is not going to sit very well with the audience at home as well. How do you look at it?
I think you can compare it with the Suez crisis of 1956 when UK lost the control of Suez Canal. So it means that Iran would like to draw some leverage because they are going to definitely look at reconstruction of the country. There will be huge destruction. So it should be somewhere in the midway that they also get some benefit out of it. But ultimately, Iran will be looking at some guarantees that this doesn't happen, next time, because we've seen it last June, and now, you are into middle of a huge war within 8 months. So these are some of the conditions that Iran would put. Then, of course, it would be the next security architecture which is likely to come up. Because now there is a realization in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, and Pakistan, these are the middle powers in the Middle East and West Asia, that without a joint mechanism, you'll be, kicked around. So probably this is going to change the security architecture, irrespective of, whatever the feelings are across the Gulf. And maybe Iran can later on join, that you have to have your own security architecture. You can't rely on, people from, let's say, US. And then you have huge dent, taking place in NATO. So looking at, global impact, what happens to European theater of war? What happened to South China Sea? What happened to Indo-Pacific? But these are, I think, some of the big questions that they are going to come up. So we are looking at shifting of power balance in the region.
Brigadier Retired Waqar Hassan Khan, thank you so much for joining us. Managed instability, that phrase should unsettle us because it is increasingly where the world's hardest conflicts end up. Not resolved, not escalated to a breaking point, just sustained, absorbed, normalized. And the danger of normalizing this particular crisis is significant. The Strait of Hormuz is not an abstraction. It is the passage through which a third of the world's seaborne oil moves. Every week, this remains unresolved. The structural risk to the global economy deepens quietly, incrementally, and without a press conference. Tonight, we began with a performance of power. We traced it to the cost behind the scenes, and we ended with the exit that will not move, and the hard structural reasons why. 3 segments, 1 thread. And the final thread is this. The distance between what is being said and what is actually happening is widening, and that distance has consequences for markets, for countries like Pakistan caught in the middle, and for the credibility of every diplomatic effort that is long on process and short on outcome. Reality is not built on moments. It is built on outcomes, and tonight those outcomes remain uncertain. I am Zunaira Azhar, and this was DECODE. Good night.